Hi, my name is Oasis and I own A Transactional Support. I'm a transaction coordinator that works with a lot of agents in the state of California. So I come on here and I love to share my experiences and give some tips and tricks about things that you can include with your disclosure packets or within your files, or even just best practice tips. So today we're going to go over some of the nuances that you have whenever you're working with an exempt seller. 5 things that you can do whenever you're working with an exempt seller. Number 1, ask them how much time that they've spent in the property. You want to make sure, even if the seller is exempt from filling out certain disclosures in a residential transaction, that they still give full disclosure. And that leads me to number 2, supplying your client with a TDS and an SPQ. That way, when they're filling out the exempt seller disclosure, they take the time to include all the information from all the questions on the TDS and SPQ that they do know, and that way they give full disclosure to those buyers. Number 3, make sure they include that entity information on the purchase contract and the listing agreement. They can also get an RCSD filled out, but make sure when they're completing this information that they include the name of, for example, their trust and the time that it was dated. So in a lot of situations we run into exempt sellers because someone does own a property in a trust and maybe they've now inherited it from their deceased mother. In those situations, it's really imperative to make sure that we enter in the correct trust information and the correct date. And that leads me to number 4. You want to make sure that the sellers of the property are giving the appropriate information over to the escrow company that's going to be facilitating the transfer of title. That way, they can verify that we have all the correct parties signing and that the correct sellers are actually selling the property. And last but not least, whenever you're working on a property with an exempt seller, you are going to be excluding some disclosures such as the TDS and the SPQ. But there are disclosures incorporated in those forms that you have to include if you're not going to be using those disclosures. For example, the water heater smoke detector advisory. We don't always include that advisory in every file because most of that language is included on the TDS, but whenever you're working on an exempt seller, make sure you at least include that form and check with your brokerage if there's any other forms that they want you to include whenever you're not using the TDS and the SPQ.